Hey, what's up everyone? This is Snackbox. Hope you all are having an amazing day. Guys, in today's video, I'm going to show you how to build your nuker for Chimera in the best way possible so you are able to deal enough damage to complete the single attack trials. There are a few trials that need a certain amount of damage to be completed, but there are two that are very specific because you need to deal an X amount of damage with a single skill. And to be able to do that with specific champions, you need to get every little bit of damage, every little bit of extra damage that you can get. And there are a lot of factors that are coming into this, but the most important part is how you build your nuker. Now, in this trial here on the ramp form, on the trials number 2, the hard one, you need to deal 750,000 damage with one single skill. That is not that easy to do. The ramp form has the highest defense of all the forms and is pretty tanky. You need to have all the debuffs that you can get and all the buffs that you can get to be able to deal that damage with specific champions, because a lot of the champions that are good for Chimera, that provide a lot of debuffs and buffs and fill out multiple roles, don't have high multipliers. So you really have to play all the cards that you have, right? So another trial is on the Viper form, where we have to deal 800,000 damage with a single skill. This is a little bit easier to do as the Viper form is, squishier than the ramp form, but still a really tough challenge for most players. Now, there are two different types of nukers. For one, we have enemy max HP champions like Marius, or another option is Knut, for example. And just to name a few, Autorion is also another one. And those champions deal most of the damage based on enemy max HP. Now the thing here is that enemy max HP won't work for the ramp trial because it is excluded. It will not count damage from counterattacks and skills that scale based on enemy max HP. Pretty unfortunate, but that's just how it is. There is a way to do it, but for that you have to have a 9-piece Slayer set on Marius, and the additional extra bonus damage from the Slayer set will count towards that trial, but it needs to proc 3 times, and the chance for that is very, very low. Now for this trial right here on the Viper form, it doesn't matter if it's enemy max HP or not, so here it does work. Now, as I said, two different types of champions, enemy max HP nukers, and then we have non-enemy max HP nukers. For example, Toshiro, Ninja, Harima, right? Then another one that is really, really good, Balar, right? And Balar is one of those champions that is really struggling with his multipliers. He doesn't hit really hard, especially if you don't have a high blessing. It's really hard to hit the damage thresholds, but there are ways to do it. And I will give you a few general rules on how to achieve that goal, to hit hard enough. Basically, you want to ignore as much defense as possible. Now I'm talking about Chimera specifically, and for Chimera, defense ignore is the most important part because the defense is the highest compared to the other clan bosses. That's why the best set in general, and also the set with the highest def ignore in the game, is Merciless. So you definitely want to put a 6-piece Merciless set on whatever nuker. It doesn't matter if it's a max HP nuker or a non-max HP nuker. 35% def ignore will boost the damage, even if it's an enemy max HP. The only way to boost your enemy max HP damage in Chimera is ignoring defense and more crit damage. Obviously also debuffs like decreased defense, which lowers the defense, but we're going to talk about max HP hits more later. So 35% def ignore is the best set. Merciless set, 6-piece set bonus. This is the best set bonus that you can have on your nuker. Now the thing is, it's a 9-piece set, right? So we have accessories for it, and in the best case, you have 2 Merciless accessories at least, right? because that means that we only need 4 other artifacts on that champion to hit the set bonus, and that leaves room for an additional Zeal set to boost our damage even more. So 2 pieces of Zeal gives us a set bonus of 20% crit damage, really juicy, and then 3% more damage for every 25% HP this champion has. This doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're ignoring a lot of defense and you have a lot of multipliers like this, it stacks up really quickly and is pretty noticeable. So most of the times this champion will be at 100% HP, and that means additional 12% more damage. Now this would be the full build of my Balar. Very, very slow, as you can see. 8.6k attack. He doesn't even have the Erratic Coronet, which I usually use on him. So if I would use the Erratic Coronet, he would have 255 attack more and be very close to 9k attack. Now, usually I do try to get to like 8k attack, but because my Balar doesn't have a high blessing, he doesn't get a lot of damage, extra damage from his blessing, so I have to compensate that with more stats, right? That's why I sacrifice a lot of speed. Now this does also only work in specific comps, and also, as you might have noticed, he's at 70% crit rate because I run him with Fina. Now obviously in the best case scenario, I would want him to be at like 250 speed minimum, right? With the same amount of stats. If he can reach like 8k attack, and still hit hard enough with a 5-star blessing, a 5-star nature's ref or whatever, then I would prefer to make him faster, right? So he gets more turns and it is easier for me to do the trials. But because I don't have a high blessing, I have to get his attack up so he can deal enough damage to complete these single hit trials. That is the most important part about this, right? If I can't do that, there's no point having more speed, right? So that is the one thing that you need to know for your account. If your damage dealer can complete these trials in one hit, that is the most important part. All the other trials are relatively easy to do, even if you don't hit 750,000 with one skill. But the single hit trials, that is what it's really about. So I want to focus on attack. I want to make sure he crits, right? If I don't have a crit rate buff, then I need to get this up to 100% crit rate. And to be honest, I probably wouldn't be able to hit hard enough with Balar if I didn't have the crit rate buff. And then after that, I want to make sure I have enough crit damage and accuracy so he lands debuffs, because it's really important for him to land debuffs for trials. Now, luckily, Balar does buff increase accuracy with his A3, so he doesn't need an insane amount of accuracy for Ultra Nightmare. You usually want 500 to 520 accuracy minimum on your debuffers, right? So you place them consistently. But yeah, like I said, luckily he has that increased accuracy, which allows us to build less. Now the big question is, which blessing do I pick? And also, which relic, right? Because this is very important. Now Balar is also a special champion because he has a passive that he can stack up. A lot of champions can ramp up damage and stats, and he ramps up Death Ignore, right? So he can get up to 20% Death Ignore just from his passive alone. So that means we have 20% here, and then we have already a 35% Death Ignore from the Merciless set. So you want to stack this up as fast as you can before you go into the ramp form, right? You wanna, in the best case scenario, stack this up to 20%. And here comes the big question, Nature's Ref or Crushing Rend, what is the best? Now, in general, Crushing Rend is the best for Chimera because the defense is so high, but only if you have a 6-star blessing. If you don't have a 6-star blessing, Crushing Rend is not that strong, because the difference is on a 5-star blessing, you will ignore 1% defense for every 25 levels, and on a 6-star blessing, you will ignore 1% defense for every 10 levels. So that's more than, that's like 2.5 the amount of defense that you are ignoring compared to the 5-star blessing. So it's a huge difference, and that's where Nature's Wrath is better on a 5-star blessing for Chimera specifically, because you get 15% more damage. And the reason for that is that, you know, you want to bring cruelty into your Chimera team. You want to lower the defense. You're lowering the defense with decreased defense already. Then you have cruelty maybe in your team. You should have. So you're lowering the defense even more. Let's say you have a 3-star or 5-star blessing, right? With a 3-star, you already decreasing the target's defense by 10%. That's already a lot. So if you have decreased defense, cruelty, you have merciless, and Balar has this death ignore passive. And then you know, use a erratic coronet, for example, or a cat's gaze, and you're already ignoring a lot of defense. And even with the erratic coronet, you get additional death ignore because there's this triangular gemstone that is best in slot, unless you're already ignoring, you know, a lot of defense. This one right here, pierce defenses. The wearer will ignore 3% of the target's defense if the target is under 2 or more debuffs. So that's another 3% death ignore. Or you could use target smash if you have a lot of accuracy and get additional damage. It really depends on how much defense you already ignore. So that being said, we are lowering the defense with cruelty. Then we are lowering the defense with a decreased defense debuff. And then we have the death ignore from sets and relics. And there's not much defense left that we can ignore. And it's probably not equal to a damage multiplying effect, like, for example, even Heaven Cast or Nature's Wrath. Now, Heaven Cast is not as good as Nature's Wrath on a 5-star, right? Because here you get 1.5% damage for each buff. That means we would have to have 10 buffs on our champion to get 15% more damage. But if we would use Nature's Wrath, we just have to place 5 debuffs, right? And after placing 5 debuffs, we are ramping our damage up to additional 15%. So it doesn't matter how many buffs we have on this champion, he will always deal 15% more damage. That's where Nature's Wrath is better. Now, Heaven Cast and Crushing Rend are better for damage dealers that don't place debuffs in general, but for Chimera, in the best case scenario, you want a champion or you want a nuker that does, you know, place debuffs too for trials, right? But if your nuker doesn't place debuffs for whatever reason, if it's a Marius or let's say a Leo, right, then Heaven Cast and Crushing Rend are much better because you get additional damage. You won't be able to stack up Nature's Wrath. Here for Balar, Nature's Wrath is definitely better, right? I will definitely choose Nature's Wrath over Heaven Cast because it's an additional percent here. The answer to what blessing is the best for your nuker depends on, is your nuker placing debuffs? If yes, then Nature's Wrath is in most cases the best option. If you want to, fully devote your nuker to Chimera, then you can also go with Crushing Rend, but only if it's a 6-star blessing. If your nuker doesn't place debuffs, then Crushing Rend, if 6-star, if not 6-star, you can go with Heaven Cast. Now, in terms of relics, there are also 2 options. Pretty much the same question as for the blessing. Does he place a lot of debuffs? Can he stack up that Erratic Coronet extra damage? Right? Because on a 4-star Erratic Coronet, we still need to place like 8 debuffs to fully max out the 30% more damage. And that is kind of like the question, is your nuker placing debuffs or not? And if he's placing debuffs, is he placing them frequently? Because, for example, there are champions like Alas that would prefer a Cat's Gaze. Now, the good thing about Cat's Gaze and Erratic Coronet is that you can fit the Boss Slayer gemstone in both of them. So it doesn't matter what you use, both of them can hold a Boss Slayer, which is very important. 10% more damage to bosses. That's a lot, right? Because think about it, if you have the 30% from the Erratic Coronet, now you get another 10% from this gemstone. You have a 5-star blessing, Nature's Wrath, you get an additional 15%. You have a Zeal set, you get another 12%. You have Weaken, that's another 25%. And then you have to, get more damage multipliers from the team by 9-piece protection sets, 9-piece feral sets, maybe damage increasing passives. And all these things add up in the end and make sure that you deal enough damage to hit the thresholds for those single hit trials. So it's not only about the nuker that you build, obviously that plays a huge factor. It's also about how you build, the rest of the team, which we're going to talk about in another video, so keep an eye out for that. And here's another important part, the masteries. You definitely want to go with Helm Smasher. You don't want Wall Master or any of that. That's not going to do anything for you, not as much on a nuker. And you want to have a chance. It's a 50% chance, so 50-50 if you ignore additional 25% defense. That is crazy. That's an additional lethal set, basically, and you have a 50-50 chance. So you want to get Helm Smasher. You want to get all these damage multiplying masteries. Chimera has like 2 billion HP or whatever, so definitely higher max HP. That means another 6% more damage. You get another 8% more damage if the target has less than 40% HP, which is most likely the case after a couple of days. If your clan is active, Chimera should be below 50% or 40%. And then another 5% when you are attacking with full HP, which you want anyway, because we have the Zeal set, right, which gives us another 12% more damage when we have full HP. So that is kind of the thing. You want to squeeze out every little extra damage, every little multiplier that you can get out of masteries, the relic, gemstones, blessing, gear, passives, and other sets. Now for enemy max HP champions, it's a little bit different. Let's say you would use a Marius. Now my Marius has Soul Reap now, but usually if I would use him for Chimera, I would use a 6-star Crushing Rend Blessing. In the best case scenario, you have a 6-star Blessing for Marius anyway. That's like, the first thing you should focus on when you get Marius, to get him to a 6-star Blessing, fully awakened, because that's where you unlock his, full power. Now with him, you could theoretically, like I already mentioned, you could build him in a 9-piece Slayer set. That would work. You would get additional turn meter. Also, the other stats are pretty good. Crit damage, crit rates, speed. And then you also have a chance to deal additional AoE damage based on the damage dealt by AoE skills. Now my Marius, with his max HP hit, if I have Crushing Rend and the Cat's Gaze, he hits with his max HP hit for 1.5 million per hit. So that's like, 4 to 4.5 million damage from the A2 alone. And that is a lot of damage, right? Now, the way that I do it is I put my Marius in a 9-piece Merciless set. And I do this pretty much with every max HP nuker that I have. I don't have a 9-piece Slayer set on him. Otherwise, I would try that. But it is pretty tricky to get the single hit target done with a Slayer set. It's more RNG heavy, so I would not even try to do it with him. But it's definitely possible. Now the thing is, the Zeal set doesn't really help. It doesn't really help with the max HP hit. But the Death Ignore does. And also here you have a 15% chance of getting an extra turn. That means I can pretty much cycle that skill back more often. Because, I get an extra turn here. Then I also have a chance to decrease the cooldown, which I forgot to mention earlier. The Merciless set, the 4-piece set bonus is also very, very strong. Every time when dealing damage, you have a 30% chance to decrease a random skill's cooldown. On a free hitter, you know, it procs really often. And also you have a chance to get an extra turn, so you can cycle those skills back so often, and it will deal so much damage that you don't have to worry about any of the damage trials. So theoretically, this is on a 2-turn cooldown, since you have this, where you get an extra turn, and then you have an additional chance to decrease the skill cooldowns, and you just cycle those max HP hits back to back to back. And it's pretty damn amazing. And Wildcat's Gaze, first of all, it is the best relic for PvE on Marius, for dungeons, for soloing dungeons, and also for Chimera, because like I said, the defense on the Chimera is the highest, and it's also very strong in the arena. And that's why I basically have these gemstones in here. The mythical one doesn't really help with Chimera, but it's very good for arena, so that's why it's in there. But the other ones do help a little bit, at least this one, which ignores an additional 5% on every consecutive hit. So that helps with the damage as well. So like I said, Crushing Rend, Cat's Gaze, Death Ignore, Gemstones, and then again, Helm Smasher helps a lot. So yeah, guys, that's pretty much all that you have to pay attention to. Like I said, Crushing Rend or Nature's Wrath, the difference is not big if you have a 6-star blessing. The difference from Nature's Wrath to Crushing Rend is not immense. On Chimera, Crushing Rend performs slightly better, but it's not that crucial. You can still use Nature's Wrath. If you have a 5-star blessing or less, then Nature's Wrath is definitely better. If you have a nuker that is placing debuffs, if not, then Heaven Cast might be the way to go. And the same thing applies to whether you should go for Cat's Gaze or the Ereti Coronet. So yeah, I will do a video on how to build your debuffers and support champions, when to use a protection set or a feral set to maximize your damage output so you can hit the damage thresholds. And yeah, keep an eye out for that. And with that being said, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed, please hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel if you want to see more raid content. The YouTube algorithm's going to suggest you a video that you might like right here, and see you in the next one.